Hello, everybody. We are here today with Maxwell I Gold, who just came out with Oblivion Influx. I think, like 2 weeks ago, right, Max? It hasn't been a long time.
Yeah, it's August 6th, so a little over
Okay.
almost like a month, no, almost a month ago,
It's
right?
bad. I'm
Somewhere
like, what
around,
month is
yeah.
this? September. Anyways, here we all are in lockdown still. The days blend. What day is this even? What month? Doesn't even matter. So we're going to hear you read some poems, and we're going to discuss those poems. And I don't know how many you have to read, so we're just keeping it loose and open. And I'm super excited. I've read this book, but it's always good to hear it from the actual author. That's kind of why I do this, because it's a really spoiled way of getting not really private readings, because this is sharing, but kind of like a private reading from a poet
A
that
private
I
public reading.
admire. Yeah, a private public reading from a poet that I admire. So, but first, I just want you to tell us a little bit about Oblivion and Flex. I know a lot of people are already familiar with it, but just kind of, you know, what was the idea behind it? Why you decided to put it together and publish it? What inspired it? I'm kind of really interested in the cyber gods connections that you build and where you might be going with that at some point too.
Um, I've been getting asked this question a lot, and I've been thinking about it because apart from just wanting to have a book out, there was this idea of wanting to wanting this idea of wanting to tie my mythos together and tie this, like tie the gods together, and also shine more of a light on prose poetry, which is something that I've been wanting to do. Um, so I think that was part of it as well, and wanting to sort of create a new take on prose poetry specifically as well.
I know this is a discussion you and I have had many times, and you have had many more times. Do you want to try to define prose poetry for anybody who's kind of going like, what?
Yeah, I know we've talked about this a little bit too. There's, historically speaking, weird poetry, like weird fiction, has usually been more, has laid more in the like the formalism world. More of a metered poem, um, and prose poetry doesn't necessarily have a structure or a meter all the time. Um, there is still a rhythm, there is still a flow to it, but it is more of a it is more of a planned out flow. If that makes sense. It's more of a planned out free form flow. The dogs want to participate too.
That was my very subtle shut up.
um, but yeah, it's more of a planned out free flow. If that makes
Hmm.
sense. And but the other part of it too is that it doesn't necessarily have to have a narrative. Um, that's the difference between flash fiction and prose poetry, is that poetry in general doesn't have to abide by a narrative. It's kind of like, it's like a dream.
Hmm.
It's like a flash of something that, when you're asleep and you see like a, I don't know, a clock, or you're walking through a space and you wake up and then you're in another space. And it's the same thing with prose poetry.
Yeah.
um
I like that you say like a dream, because like that's kind of how I think of it, as like a real Taoistic, in the now, kind of momentary. This instant, this is everything around this instant, and now we're moving on to a different instant.
yeah, and I guess that's kind of the idea of like oblivion, the idea of like
Hmm.
nothingness. You're in this space that is flowing from one dream, one idea, one concept to another. I mean, like they're all sort of connected, but they're not really connected at the same time.
Hmm.
So that was also kind of the idea of um of uh of of the book. It kind of starts with like the epitaph in the beginning, but then it ends with the epitaph, sort of how dream, like a dream. You
Hmm.
you sort of remember the beginning and end of a dream, but um
Yeah.
it still doesn't exactly fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can kind of go anywhere within that structure. So, well, how about, do you want to read one?
Sure.
I mean, that's kind of why we're here. So that's like a leading question. Because if you said no, I'd be like, oh, okay. I don't know what to do now.
So
I'm actually going to share the link. So I forgot why I had Amazon up. But I am going to share that link real quick. So anybody who would like to find a copy of Oblivion Influx by Maxwell I. Gold, that link is about to get dropped.
I'm gonna read one that wasn't, because there are a few reprints in here, but there are some that haven't been published, or I mean that are new, that are original to this collection. So I'm going to read one that's called "Of Masks and Monsters" that I wrote last year for, that had some obvious inspiration. Tried to be a little subtle, but you know. So this one is called "Of Masks and Monsters." On ancient hills of stone, metal, and dread, rainbows bled from the sky, dripping stardust and tears over the ruined world. At the edge of the cliff face, silhouettes painted by the dusty palettes of shadow and doom stretched the twilight as old bones with faces masked in death waited to be released from this estranged isolation. Their joints frozen in history, quarantined at some unspeakable moment in time, never to be spoken of again. The wind howled under the guise of a swirling mass of stars and pounding lights, flooding the empty streets of the dead city. Great silver forges that once belched molten fire now laid bare, cold and helpless, against the wind as it welled up inside the mighty furnaces, expelling into the night, crying like an unholy demon that needed to be exorcised. Past withered columns of plastic and powder, beyond the bleeding hill, a scattered glint of amber and neon lights polluted the horizon. Nothing, it seemed, would ever be the same as the fulfillment of pale and shallow corporate dreams beguiled the ghosts and phantom plutocrats who haunted those fields, masks and bones, dressed in their silicon gowns, moaning in the emptiness of the dreadful night. The towers from the old city glowed with a green translucence, as if those sickly ghosts were hoping to be freed from an unbearable existence. Soon, clouds gathered over the hill, pressing against the faded rainbows, when the wind once again kicked up the dust in tantrum, its foul screech spilling into the broken roads and shattered sidewalks, followed by the fierce claps of thunder and violent flashes of lightning. The sad wraiths sheltered in their towers as the storm pounded the earth even harder, for beyond the hill no stardust or rainbow was visible, merely the black mass of some protoplasmic cloud spilling over the horizon like a mask. Manic stars flickered abhorrently above in the silent dark, unable to control themselves as a strange malaise took hold, sterile and bleak. It had been centuries since the last cyber god had visited this pitiful realm, and those who dwelled here wouldn't forget, though the blight descending from the heaving mass of storm clouds was different. The air became stale, thick, with an unnatural taste of rust and death that caused these deathless things hiding inside the decaying city to scatter, with a direness and profundity so awful and so malevolent. Zurong, the living darkness, had infected this existence, plastic faces and metal teeth congealed in bone and blood, transuding black bile from the sockets of silent eyes, no longer able to gaze on the world as it once was, but as it always would be, under a mask, living in darkness.
Ooh. All right, which one was that? I just pulled up. Oh, you can't really see that. That is my copy of Oblivion Flex, and I'm going to go through the TOC. Which one was that?
That was of Masks and Monsters.
Oh, right. Okay. And where you? All right, I want to kind of get into this a little bit about the cyber gods. Where is that in your? Because you have the whole mythos built up already, pretty much. That's my impression.
The pantheon.
Yeah, where is this going to fit in that? Or is it just kind of like a little spin-off dream?
I think this one's kind of like I've been working on a few like like on a few things. Like I've worked on a novella that kind of is meant to like bring them together, if you will. This one, it's called zurong, is what I called it. Like this idea of like living darkness. Yeah, I think this one was kind of meant to be like a little bit of a spin-off because I haven't really wrote much about it. I don't genderize them. I don't call them like it, he, she, or her. They don't really have other pronouns. So
Right.
I haven't really written anything about it. This has been the only poem. Like Adnagon, I might read Adnagon next actually, because that was actually the first poem that I wrote. Adnagon and Hasdrog are two of the cyber gods that kind of get the most attention.
Okay. Do you actually have them written out kind of as I guess J.R. Tolkien had, I always hate saying this word, Silmarillion? That one?
Silmarillion, yeah.
Yeah, that book. That book that I just said. As a course, I just said that. Do you have them kind of written, I mean, not probably that crazily complicated, but do you have it kind of written out like that, or?
It is crazily complicated, yeah.
So this will be the next book nobody can pronounce once everything comes out.
yeah, it'll be unnecessarily complicated names that that no one can pronounce. That sometimes even I have trouble pronouncing the names.
That's funny. I was going to ask you something else. Oh yeah, and do you see anything happening from this? Because this is obviously about a part of time, when we were really kind of thick into the pandemic. Do you think you're going to do kind of like a follow-up to this maybe? We kind of don't really know how it's going to pan out yet. I feel like we should, but we don't.
Maybe. Sometimes it's more of a response to a period in time as much as not as much as it would be like planning ahead, if that makes sense. But but it might, this, Strength might make an appearance again. Especially with this novel that I'm working on. The idea is to kind of bring them together, like in a world where like people interact with them differently, obviously than in poems, but
okay.
So
well, I'm ready to hear another one. You said
okay. Yeah, the next one I want to read.
I'm getting my thing open.
Yeah, the next one I want to read is it's simply titled Adnagon or Adnagon, I guess, depends. But I always pronounce it Adnagon.
Okay, and I didn't know how to pronounce that, so.
If I can remember the page that I put it on. I did. There was also a reason to how the poems flowed a little bit. Like more of the cyber gods are sort of meant to like Adnagon and Hasdrog are meant to appear a little more towards the end, at least in that way. But that's kind of how it meant to go in my head. So yeah.
I'm going to share that title in chat in case anybody wants to go look that up and follow along.
Okay, so this one is Adnagon, which originally appeared in Spectral Realms #7 in 2017. I remembered, fearfully so, on that day when past the hungering blackness, its spectral breath wheezed with a sighing blast that made all the stars adhere to the shining yellow radiance that was so brilliant and so terrifying. On the streets, the old skyscrapers stood, and on the streets, the towers waned towards the blasphemous skies that began to echo with cries that reflected off the golden dust. I walked alone in the chaotic streets crowded with a populace who, too, was fearful of the yellow sky. From the deepest parts of cosmic space, past all the lost cries of monstrous cosmogonies that were themselves most terrifying, the yellow disfigurement had been awoken. Adnagon, Atop his throne of marble and ivory, in a place unscalable in thought, stirred, and the voids shuddered. It was with a heavy heart I saw the world divulge into such a frenzy. This was not the first time that the yellow wrath of that ancient horror had plagued our earthly realm. From the earliest known records of our most primitive human ancestors, brief flashes of its memory lingered in dreams and in thought, whether it may have been delusionary outcries from those outcasts of our primordial founders or some warning. It was ignored. The skies bled with that same yellow dust which floated in the eyes of all who were hypnotized by its odd phosphorescent glow. And so, too, did in dream my mind becomes filled with the visions of what was to come. No one would dare listen to my warnings or cries. From the howling eons, deserts turned to glass and trees were uprooted in furious rage. All seemed overwhelmed as the vaulted firmaments cracked under the sorrowful weight of golden stardust. Nature was defiled, construed into a hellish fury as I felt the radiant shudder of that yellow glow. And I remembered on that day when the stars reigned their contemptuous fury, unabashed by the light of that pasty dust that floated hauntingly in the last moments of my thoughts, and the last fragments of my mind were finally strewn across space and time, when I too would become dust, drifting in the ghostly embers of cosmic voids, whereupon I would reach the halls of that blighted thing at the ancient ends of time. In the cities of my home, the chaos of the immensity was so great, it appeared that the literal terror was beyond comprehension. No order or conceivable sense of balance. There was nothing left, no thought or consciousness, where any discernible person could attempt to see in the world they once knew. Before the flicker of that horrid glow, before the flicker of that horrid glow, and there was nothing left of me.
I think that's one reason I actually wasn't familiar with, and well done, by the way. So I just launched into that. I didn't really know anything about prose poetry before I met you. Like, I mean, I knew about it, but I'd never really read much of it. I think one of the things I like about it is because you can just kind of riff onto these crazy images, and so it really does, as you're reading it, or as I'm reading it or listening to you read it, it is like just images kind of superimposing over each other. So, but yeah, that I think my favorite is the towers waning into the sky.
Yeah.
That is such a just or not a wrong way to put it, but a different way to put it, like an unusual way to put it. But such a vivid image of these towers just kind of disappearing into like this glow, smog, whatever.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a musicality to it, like
yeah, oh, definitely.
almost like you're playing the piano or you're playing an instrument or you're just like striking the keys at the right time, and like I don't know, this particular piece was kind of, because I reflected about this particular piece in an interview, or in a soon to be interview that I need to submit. That like this particular, because the question was, do you have a favorite poem, and that you've written, and there are some that I've written, obviously, like some new ones that I've written for this one, but I think partially because it's the first, and also because it was kind of like my response in trepidation to a world in 2016 that was just on the brink of of chaos. And I think that's what kind of birthed the cyber gods. I was also reading about like neutron stars, and this idea that like towards the edge of space, like 14 billion years ago, like that was the farthest that we could quote unquote see towards the edge of time. So that's where adnagon dwells. That's where it lives. As like so I think that's why like this piece is still, it's still feels just as powerful when I read it, as back then, because it was sort of my reaction to the world in 2016.
Oh wow! So that's actually like the first poem of the cyber god world. basically. Like, this is the poem where you kind of conceived of that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So adnagon is kind of like the, I don't know, like he's like, or I mean, in this poem, I referenced adnagon as a he, but other poems I reference him as an it, or but adnagon is kind of like at the top.
Yeah. Oh, we are in trouble. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty common thing with deities too, is like gender swapping around, because even like in traditional, we're in America, there's a lot of Christianity. It's the Father, the Son, and the Mother. I guess I'm actually not that fluent in all of that, but yes. So I'm going to stop talking about gender swapping and gods right now, because I don't want to get in trouble. But that's that's a pretty common thought, I think, to think that gods are bigger than a gender. They're kind of not an either or, but an all.
Well, it's fun to play. It's fun to play around with them. That's why. I mean, that's one of the reasons why. Like, That's one of the reasons why the cyber gods are here. And I think as humans, we use it to justify our existence in a world that's utterly meaningless. But I suppose that's another conversation. But but I try not to moralize them. Like they're not on anyone's side. There's no really concept of good or evil. They're just there.
Yeah, like volcanoes or hurricanes.
Yeah. But we're also a cause for it at the same time. Like I may read this stuff, like Hasdog, for example, is a virus. And for the record, I wrote that one in like late 2017, early 2018. But the point being is that they were meant to be these things that may have predated humans, but humans also fed into them and made them worse. So there's a little bit of social commentary there. So
okay.
So speaking of that, I wanted to read this one. This is more of a little longer piece. I guess technically this one is considered more of a flash piece. I wrote it more as a poem, but I think it was originally published as, I think they published it as a story, but I wrote it as a poem. This one is titled Hasdog, the Mad God. Actually, I've never read this one before out loud. From the venomous light of a yellow star, rampant and infectious, spores floated helplessly amid the dark void, carrying its microbial essence as it slumbered. Hasdog waited in ice and frozen in time. One of the first cyber gods, it swirled from a cellular pod ejected from a toxic nuclear light. This cosmic virus brought only terror to the veritable dreams and bodies of those in its path. Worlds had gone mad, divulging into anxious frenzies from an uncaring protoplasmic horror, stretching, yearning, and budding into the very nightmares of the infected. Cities were consumed by fire and swallowed themselves in tumultuous destruction, wrought by a galactic contagion that had stirred from its rest. Those fortunate enough to survive the ravages of the plagues and senses can only speak of its unrelenting horror. Dreams wrapped in scar tissue, unable to fully heal from the spectral clawed grip, left screaming in the night, as the only account of the mad god's wrath. I remembered how the skies coalesced with clouds of gray as they sought to consume the light, swallowing the last of days, and because of that, I confined myself here, upon my windowsill, waiting, watching in the tower of the highest precipice, helpless as the horizon formed a brown and gray wall cloud, marching onwards, concealing our doom. Through the black skies and over the particulate air, I stood behind a glass window while the thunder prepared to make ready its trumpets, ready to hail the great, monstrous evil crackling over me. Spectral flashes of brilliant light expelled from the innards of the nebulous mass which housed them, auroras cutting across the skies with wrath unimaginable even in my wildest torments. The storm had taken hold and swept up the dust and dirt of such profound terrors, mixing into a muddy clay, spattering onto my tearful reality. The window shuddered as a small crack snaked along the center, trembling, waiting, and shivering, trying to run from the titanic clashes in the black skies. No light or shadows could be seen in my room. Only the swirling clouds of Hasdrog's viral hunger could be heard, and I had to escape. I wouldn't be consumed by it. I shattered my window, bloodied and free, plummeting into the chasm until I had fallen far into the darkest pit where it seemed so bright compared to the horrid skies stained by that cosmic virus, lingering with a deathful glint.
Oh, when did you write this?
2017.
Wow.
Or 2018 is when I read it.
Now I pictured, because it's so vividly described, it seems like, obviously it hasn't quite happened like that, hopefully,
Yeah.
And hopefully this isn't you predicting the future, okay? So don't do that. We don't really need this. But was this based on a real event? Because what I picture is you as a poet leaning against a window watching a rainstorm maybe coming across New York or something, and then this poem springs up. Like, how much of this is, like, how did this just happen in your mind?
It was inspired because I was reading an article about scientists had discovered like ancient anthrax buried in Siberia that was still living in like a deer carcass or something like that. And so I was just like, oh, so it's obviously before, the
then
world we live in today.
In a
Right.
market in China.
I don't know. So then I'd always been, I've always been kind of like, humans are destroying the planet, kind of, I've always been like worried about those, like our effect on the world, and like just like what could we do to make it worse? And I guess I read that article, and then I just imagined like, this like bacterial pod of this like ancient god that had landed here, and the humans discover it, and they're like, oh, let's study this, and then all of a sudden like Hasdrog awakes, and it's like someone sitting by their window looking at this awful, terrifying like storm, and like it's so terrible that like they would rather kill themselves than like watch the world like swallow itself in insanity because of humanity's own like inability to care for the world. So that, I guess that's kind of where it came from.
Okay. I know you said that you don't really have like a morality necessarily. Do you feel like there's a little bit, because I kind of feel like I got this, but when you're the reader, your own things are being reflected on what you're reading, especially in poetry. Do you feel like you have like a little bit of an ecological morality or conscience that you're trying to maybe even instill in people, or a little warning, or it's just kind of instances, bits of dream?
I think there's, I guess when I say I don't have their morality in the sense like that the gods themselves aren't there's not a like they don't necessarily have a concept of good and evil like in Greek mythology or in some other mythologies where there's like well, let me take that back. Like in trying to think of the correct way I want to say this. Like in certain mythologies, in certain faiths, you know, we as humans tend to have the ability. We tend to have we have the tendency to um, to yeah, I mean, to moralize our gods and to assume that they're good or evil. So I think that's where I was going with that. I guess in terms of the of the of the agenda, I suppose. It's not necessarily done with a with a conscious effort, but I think, you know, I you know, I mean, I one of the cyber gods I wrote about, gabrielax. You know, it was this faceless corporate monster that was kind of written about, like, capitalism, not on purpose, but it just kind of was. And you know, I've written other ones, like gabrielax is another one that was kind of this monster that lives at the bottom of the Marianas Trench that, like, is eating all the trash in the ocean. So I mean,
We need that monster.
yeah, right. Um, I mean, that poem that from Space and Time magazine, 4 million years. Uh, that was that was that was about, like, trap resort is what I called it, but it was kind of about, like, the world, like the humans were fleeing the back of this living planet, which I called it a she, um, because they had destroyed her. So, like, and it was called 4 million years, so they left her. Um, so I guess the short answer is it's an unconscious thing, but it just kind of comes out that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think it would be hard to write. I mean, because writing is a part of us, it's a product of who we are and everything. And I think it'd be hard to have like a strong feeling about something and not have it at least a little bit. But honestly, it's good things to be afraid of. You know, these are all, and I don't know why when you talk about the consume the like kind of the corporate god that you were referring to, the name Bezos instantly popped in my head. I don't know why I made that free association there. It's just weird.
That's
Do
not,
you
it's
have
not a bad, you know,
do
it's
what?
not a bad, it's not a bad association. So,
That's it was like, Bez. Yeah, I should probably stop. I'm gonna get in trouble.
yeah.
We can have a chat later off camera.
Right.
Do you have another one that you would like to read?
Yeah, I can read one more. Um,
And then should
I'll read gabrielax. So
okay.
that was the one. Things weren't too happy when I wrote this, but this was yeah. So this one is titled gabrielax.
Okay. I love reading along with you, by the way. This is so awesome.
I have written a few more about this particular one, but under a starry cyber web filled with bites of malice, I felt the impending weight of a cold, faceless evil preparing to swallow what remained of my unfortunate spirit. In the corporeal sadness of this lonely state, I wandered under oppressive neon stars, whose sinister fluorescence chirped in my ears. Their sounds taunted my senses like an unholy music, with a melody so dark and hypnotic that led me to traipse about the streets of the city I once called my home. Soulless and empty, my body withered under the grim economic schizophrenia that too has strangled the world in a form most familiar to me. As the concrete transformed to plastic, my eyes strained against the waning chaos, where steel columns whose towering metallic skeletons moaned in the spectral glow of the night. Their arthritic bodies creaked under the weight of oxidizing trusses as I walked beneath them. Like me, they were also subject to the dark arithmetic of a faceless creature who calculated their doom with cold symbols and black logic spoken in tones so foul. It was the sound of a deep viral strangulation, echoing the lamentations of 1,000 dead races whose last hope passed into silence, mere numbers in the dark. I watched as the daytime stars soon twitched and spiraled with a blasphemous mania, falling against the blue horizons, tapering off towards a purple night, preparing to devour what was left of them. At the bottom of the world, I sat pondering when death might bring me its sweet release, though, deep in the alleyways of the defiled city of plastic and dust, that monstrous obscenity had confined me to a reality built in the image of its algebraic gruesomeness. Under a starry cyber web filled with bites of malice, I felt the impending weight of a cold, faceless evil, preparing to swallow what remained of my unfortunate spirit.
I think kind of one of the crazy things about this book and this collection of poetry is how much it mirrors what is happening right now. Kind of like the last year, even though you've written it, it's a couple years in the making. Do you make that connection at all, or is that just me?
That definitely wasn't on purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, Gabrielax was written with, there was a point where I was not, where things were not going well. And, I've always had this belief about, capitalism, but I won't go on that. I guess I won't go on that rant on since we're live, but it was
I've already said God was non-binary, so we can't do worse.
It was, I guess, it was written to convey, this vast sense that, this vast sense of a system that really just doesn't care, even to the point that like other entities or other gods are useless to it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I guess I tried to convey that in other poems, that like that's kind of where like the crux of the cyber gods really like come out, is that like these like humanity has fed these cyber gods to the point where like the old ones are dead, and the old ones don't matter. And that was kind of the point of the epitaph, where it says, I'll read the epitaph real quick, where where I write in the beginning, I am the voice of the frozen night, like a metaphysical blasphemy, thick and heavy. The old ones are extinct, pieces of dimensional sand with no purpose but to romanticize humanity's doom. I am the voice of the frozen night, the first cyber god. Like, like the cyber gods are, are humanity's doom. I mean, in the most like, obviously in the most sort of like metaphysical way, but that is their, that's the idea. That is the idea behind them.
Yeah, kind of like an embodiment of our flaws, or right? Or am I off there?
Yeah. I mean, that's not a, that's not an incorrect interpretation. I mean, it's not like there's not an absolute interpretation of them, but that is, it's not, because I'm also asked about like if there's a comparison between them and like Lovecraft's like old ones, or the old gods or whatever. And I mean, there's that cosmic nihilism, like that, like that, like a little bit, but I think there's a little more. I think the cyber gods, when I created them, like goes a little more, or at least I try to extrapolate a little more.
Yeah, I actually didn't make that connection at all. Like I mean, now that you've said it, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I guess, but it was something that didn't connect for me. So,
yeah, so yeah, that was Gabrielle. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much. I guess, I mean, unless you have one more you want to read, I guess we're kind of done, but I would like to, I mean, it's on Amazon, but do you want to share like your blog or another poem? It's up to you.
Yeah, where do I put in the comments, or what do I?
No, my comments have not been working lately, but oh, you're talking about to put your site in the comments. I'm actually going to be posting this on my blog tomorrow, with all the comments and everything from, this book and your website and things like that. But yeah, you can just share them in the comments as well. And we can also go back and share them, since my comments seem to not be working lately.
Yeah, that's my website. So, but yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun. I'll have to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. What have you got coming up next? And I'm actually going to share that in public comments so that everybody can read that. There we
Um,
go.
so as I mentioned, I'm actually working on. So I'm working on a novella. The working title is called The Unspeakable, but it is kind of a little bit of a sci-fi fantasy novel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's a story about the world where the cyber gods dwell, essentially, in a planet on a planet called Trathrazor, which was one of the poems. So um, that's in the works. I am also working on a collaborative poetry collection uh, with you. So we're working on a collaborative poetry collection called Mobius Lyrics at some point.
Yeah, I know I have a wave
uh,
of guilt. Do you see the guilt in my face? Like, I know. As soon as I get, yeah, I got to get that going. But I love how those are turning out. I will
yeah,
say,
those are
like the
fun.
ones that we have done the call and response on, loving how these are turning out.
Yeah. And there's a few other projects that are in the works that I don't think I can talk about yet, but there's some stuff that will yeah, 2022 will be very busy, I think. So
Nice, nice. Well, it is always good to be busy, kind of, more or less. That's what we tell ourselves, anyways, right?
yeah,
As
right.
long as you keep writing, as long as we don't lose track of, the fact of the purpose of what we're doing is to be
Yeah.
writers. So, well, awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here and reading Oblivion and Flux for us. Like I said, the chat, I've shared the link to Amazon in the chat. And tomorrow I'm going to embed this in my blog with those links. So it's kind of a nice, easy place to find everything. But I always love hearing you read. I love your poetry. Thanks for introducing me to prose poetry because, like I said, I really wasn't that familiar with it before. So now I can say I'm a fan.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for watching today.